In this video essay, I will be talking about the techniques included within the animation process, how the techniques were developed and by who, including pioneers, developers and contemporary work. Also, last but not least, the variety of ways animation can be presented and different types of genres and forms. Persistence of vision is when something is seen and remembered. For example, when we look at something, as we change to look at something else, we remember that image before, so we don't ever see a blank image for our eyes, as our eyes remember the image seen seconds before. Stop frame, known as stop motion animation, is when we use an inanimate object to create movement. This is usually done by photographing every time you move the object to create the illusion of movement. The frame rate is how many images you have depending on how long your film is going to last. 24 images are calculated as 1 second of film. Each image is counted as 1 frame. By using this technique, the inanimate object appears to be moving. Movement of models is how you are going to move the object you are using. There are many different objects which can be used. For example, toy figures in a town called Panic can only move as a whole as their arms and legs are stuck in one position and cannot be moved or changed. Whereas Morph is created by using Play-Doh, which would take an extremely long time as every movement creates change in the whole of the Morph's body movement as a whole. Edward Muybridge was a photographer, a passionate racehorse breeder. He wanted to prove that a horse lifted all 4 feet off the ground when it was trotting. He did this by using 24 cameras to capture all 4 feet off the ground and back on the ground. He successfully achieved this target and now famous for the Muybridge horse. This technique is used now in many films, programs, etc., as stop-motion animation plays a big part within filming. This is why Edward is famous for what he done, as it's used in everyday life for films and producers. Attend Jules Marry was inspired by Edward Muybridge's work. He recorded the first series of live-action photos with a single camera by a method of chronography, which is a set of photographs of a moving object taken for the purpose of recording and exhibiting successive phases of motion. Chronography was invented by Attend Jules Marry to describe photographs of movement from which measurements could be taken and motion could be studied. The Lumiere brothers worked in a photographic studio with their father during 1894. They saw Edison's kinetoscope and decided that they wanted to make their own camera as they were inspired by Edison's kinetoscope. By the following year, during February, they had invented their own camera, which they called cinematograph. This wasn't just an ordinary camera, as it could also be used together with a magic lantern to project the films that the brothers had made themselves. The films that the brothers usually made approximately lasted about 50 seconds long. They were taken in a single shot using a tripod. The first ever film shown to an audience was called Exiting the Factory. This became very famous worldwide. All of the Lumiere brothers films were in black and white. All of the Lumiere brothers films were real life footage, so mainly based on the documentary genre. This suited their own interests. Edison was an American inventor. He developed new devices. He was one of the first inventors. He invented the phonograph, motion picture camera, and a long-lasting electric light bulb. Edison began his career in New Jersey. The phonograph was invented and gave him huge notice and famous to many. This invention was magical to many of the public, and it was so unexpected. Many people in New Jersey called him the Wizard of Menlo Park. George Pal was born into a theatrical family in 1908. George started a new job, which was an unpaid apprenticeship. Him and his girlfriend migrated to Berlin where he then found similar but paid work at a famous studio. 60 days into his new job, he became in charge of their cartoon productions. At this time, animated films were mainly used for advert purposes. George wanted to start by animating cigarettes. The pals moved to Paris, and the first company they approached bought the idea, and they became famous worldwide for this idea that George had created. George will be remembered to many as a gifted director of fantastic cinema and history, and his contributes to the field of stop-motion animation. Raymond Harryhausen was an American visual effects creator. Raymond was also a producer who created Dynamation. Dynamation is a form of stop-motion animation. Ray is famous for photographing tiny models one frame at a time while moving the models a little each time before taking the photograph for the next frame. His most famous creation was the seventh voltage of Sinbad. This made Ray well known by the public. Lotte Renger was born in Berlin in 1899. She was a German. Lotte was fascinated with silhouette puppetry. As a child, so she built her own theatre to do puppet shows for her friends and family. In 1918, Renger animated wooden rats and created the animation for the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The amazing work she created enabled her to get into an experimental animation and short film studio. At this studio, Lotte met her creative husband, which led to great success, as they both created 6 short films together, but were all produced and photographed by her husband. Lotte became a director and directed her first film, which was The Ornament of the Love-Struck Heart. This film contained 2 lovers and an ornament to reflect the lovers' moods. This film was very successful and became famous. Tim Burton was born in California in 1958. After completing an animation course at the California Institute of Arts, Tim was offered an apprenticeship at the Walt Disney Studios, as they recognized his film Stalk of the Celery Monster. He had made this within his course as part of his work. He worked as an animator at the Walt Disney Studios. He also was a storyboard artist. After working his way up throughout this world-known business, Tim began creating films for the cinemas such as Frankenweenie, Edward Scissorhands, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and more. All these films Tim created became popular to many and were shown in cinemas all over the world. Tim became famous for his creative techniques and built his career up by beginning as an apprentice at the Walt Disney Studios. Nick Park was an English filmmaker. Nick grew up interested in cartoons and made various films with help from his mother. Nick joined as a staff member at Aardman Studios, where he worked as an animator. Nick was special and unique, as all the films he created were done using plasticine to create the models within the film. At Aardman, Nick began work on Creature Comforts, a 5-minute film where animals express their opinions. This was nominated for the Best Animation Short Film and won a prize. Nick then went on to creating the Wallace and Gromit films and Chicken Run. These were successful and extremely popular. Nick was famous for these films, and using plasticine made him unique and more recognized. Animation can be presented in a variety of different genres and forms. For example, it can be used for ident for E4. This is a perfect example of stop-motion animation. Also, it can be used within films as explained. Music videos also use stop-motion animation sometimes, as the audience can be more attracted and animation may be included within the story being told within this music video. Animation is mostly used within children's TV programs or films to show that it's unrealistic. Stop-motion animation can be used in many different genres, including romance, horror, comedy, etc. It can be used within any genre and used for most forms. Stop-motion animation is used in day-to-day life for many.